This is Tyler O'Neill, senior editor at the Daily Signal. I'm honored to be joined by Sarah Elliott, who is Lady Elliott of Micklefell and the director of the Special Relationship Unit at the Prosperity Institute. It's so great to have you with us, Sarah.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So could you just give us a brief introduction to the Prosperity Institute and your relationship? You have your own special relationship with the U.S. and the U.K.
Yeah, so I actually started my career here in Washington, where I then met my British husband through my first boss, Grover Norquist, at Americans for Tax Reform. And 12 years ago, I moved to the UK to start a life with him. And now I get to have the best job in the world, where I have a foot in both countries, the UK and the US, and I work on building bridges between British policymakers and advisors with American policymakers and advisors, and all in an effort to further a stronger economic relationship between the two countries. So trade is definitely at the forefront of our agenda, as well as some national security.
I think one of the aspects of wokeism I heard you speak about earlier today that has really undermined Britain's economy and seeks to undermine our prosperity in the U.S. as well is this idea of net zero. I don't know if everybody connects it with woke, but I think it's inherently there, this idea that the world is going to end or something if we don't cut carbon emissions, 30 years ago. And they keep moving the goalposts. But from what I understand, Britain has gone more in this direction than we have, and we see energy prices over there that are 5 times higher than the United States.
Yes, it's the highest in the developed world. And this is because we've shut all of our coal power plants. We've stopped drilling for our natural fossil fuels in the North Sea. We don't frack anymore. The environmental lobby has been incredibly persuasive to the public, but it's become a groupthink in the UK and monolithic thinking that all political parties until recently embraced, including the Conservative Party, which I would say is one of the main reasons why it was not elected again in the last July in the general election. And they made commitments to net zero policies, which means decarbonizing the economy by 2035. And that completely has turned upside down our energy sources and made energy incredibly expensive. And because it's become so expensive, our consumption has gone down. And developed and thriving and prosperous countries and economies need cheap, abundant energy. And it is starting to really impact not just individual families, but businesses. And British companies are now relocating to where there is cheaper energy. It's not just at the stage of not investing in the UK. They're now actually moving their facilities and their factories, some to the US to onshore and avoid also some tariffs.
Yeah, and that, so when you look at the practices, the policies that they implement, they're stifling growth, they're stifling fracking, drilling, taking advantage of the resources we have. I remember seeing the old pictures of American cities that had the smog over them, and I thank God that we don't live in a country that looks like that today. But we're still burning coal, we're still burning these fossil fuels. And I think it's a different sell for the climate alarmists to say, oh, this is some theoretical danger, but it was really successful in Britain.
Yes, it was. And I do think there are a couple cultural differences that kind of tend to explain it. I mean, the United Kingdom is 40 times smaller than the United States. It is an island nation. It has Northern Ireland, which is the northern tip of the island, and then it has Wales, Scotland, and England, and that makes up the United Kingdom with some foreign territories around the globe. But it has a very different mentality than Americans. It's very much more we realize we are an island nation. We don't have all the resources. It's our national duty to preserve and to help the environment, to keep it going. It's a much more communitarian mindset, I would say. And they've been convinced by places like the BBC and higher education, with no pushback whatsoever, that these policies will actually save the environment when it doesn't even make a dent. It doesn't barely changes the centigrade, even, like 0.3 of a centigrade by the year 2100. It's not going to make a difference. And also, the way we consume energy is much more efficient now. It's much safer. It's much more environmentally friendly than it used to be. But yes, these images of smog and big factories polluting the air, this is all still in everyone's mindset. And they also feel that there are a lot of limited resources and we must preserve. So it's very different from the American mindset that is more continental, more innovative, I would say, approach. And whereas I find a lot of the British are more fear-based.
So we're talking as Trump is negotiating a new trade deal with the United Kingdom. Very first of the trade deals announced on VE Day. Would you speak to the significance of this, what you're watching, what you think? You just had a big report laying out the path, a groundwork for a successful deal.
Yes. So we have... At the Special Relationship Unit, we've just released our priorities for a USUK trade deal. And we want to lower all the tariffs and non-tariff barriers where we can. We want to have mutual recognition of each other's standards and professional qualifications, and build on the data bridges that have been formed, reassess the international rule orders, like at the WTO, the self-designation status of a developing nation, reassess that, look at rules of origin. Those are some of the aspects that we're looking at, and you can find the report at prosperity.com. I think that the deal is definitely the end of the beginning of the conversation, which means there's a lot more to come. It's very significant. It was on VE Day, which is where the modern US-UK relationship was formed. It was forged during the Second World War. Winston Churchill came to America at the end of the war and coined the term the special relationship so that the UK and the US could lead in the fight against communism, which ended up with us winning the Cold War. And we still think it's incredibly vital that the Atlantic relationship remains strong and continues to underpin the Western free world, and that our connection through values and history are completely relevant to any era or age, and that together we are unstoppable when united. And so we need to bolster those economic links. Economic security is national security, and we need to work on those supply chains so that we're not reliant on our adversaries who do not share our values. And I think it, on that point, very important that they had this on May 8th, Thursday, prior to the Treasury Secretary meeting with China in Switzerland on Saturday, because that, of course, is the main target of these Liberation Day tariffs, and that the main relationship that needs to be rebalanced is that with China. And the UK and the US stood shoulder to shoulder before that meeting and with this deal, which is, again, it is more of a tariff sector agreement. It's not a full comprehensive trade agreement, but it begins the process of firming up other areas and moving forward, which is fantastic. And, I look forward to, I was really impressed, I must say, that agriculture was included, because the UK has always been hesitant about having American agriculture come to the UK. Very intimidated by it, and also its practices of how it's grown and cultivated. But the fact that it was at the table is a sign that they're open to American agriculture, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, very promising sign. You talk about the relationship, with China, and how does the U.S.-UK relationship, strengthen us and counter the influence of the Chinese Communist Party? Because I also think, when we talk about net zero, one of the big downsides of policies that are focused in this direction is that they often empower China.
Absolutely. I mean, China is not emulating net zero. They don't care about the environment. India doesn't care about the environment. These are, China has self-designated itself in the WTO as a developing nation. Well, it's not a developing nation anymore, which is one of our recommendations. That should change. And it's opening up 2 power plants a week, like burning very dirty coal, not in an efficient and environmentally friendly way. So, why should our economies suffer while others are just running wild? We have to be able to compete, and we do burn and run energy much more efficiently and cleanly than developing nations or nations like China. And I think also we have to recognize that China is has forced labor, is committing genocide, has slave labor. It is a country that does not share our values. And it's very tempting for the UK and Europe and other countries around the world to look to China for the cheap money and the cheap goods. But at the end of the day, is that really in your long-term best interest to align yourself with them or to rely on them economically? They are not in favor of you being a strong developing nation, and they're very actively against our way of life. So they're not passive players; they're aggressive players. So I think that the UK and Europe sometimes need to be guided to rely more on the United States economically, especially in this day and age. But they need to be reminded that, the United States, you want to rely more on us than China.
Are there any lessons that the United States should learn from Britain? You have a lot of experience in both places. I think we're seeing positive steps, at least in the U.S. government, listening to things like the Cass report, re-examining our really radical stances on so-called gender-affirming care. But are there things that you would point to that, Britain is actually leading the way and we should listen?
That's a great question. Thank you. And thanks for bringing up the Cass report, because I do think on the whole transgender debate, the UK has actually been ahead of the curve on this, pushing back against gender-affirming care. And it's come from the left. It's come mainly from left-wing feminists and lesbians who, have been told that actually they're a male in the wrong body,
offensive.
and they're going, it's very offensive, and that they are taking over these safe female spaces. So it's something that's united the right and the left, and they've been very effective in the UK. And just recently, the Supreme Court in the United Kingdom has ruled that biological sex matters and that you cannot just self-identify yourself as the opposite gender. So it's the pendulum is swinging. Are there any other issues that the UK is leading on? I mean, I think in terms of food standards, they have, they don't raise GMOs. They don't in their foods. They don't include certain dyes in their foods, colored dyes, which has come up recently here in the States that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Health Secretary is now phasing out because of lobbying efforts here in the U.S. But in the UK, we have not had that problem because they were already not included in the British food. But I would say food standards are very high. I would say there are a lot less preservatives and additives. And again, there's They're not genetically modified in any way. So, the Brits are very proud of that. They're slightly intimidated by American agriculture that has those practices, but I could see the UK actually being an influence on the US and maybe pointing out how you can do things differently.
When maybe a negotiation could lead the U.S. toward adopting some of those standards. I mean, I know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is seriously considering a lot of these things and finally asking questions that a lot of Americans have been, wanting the more mainstream health authorities to ask, which is ironic after COVID. We finally had this system with a reckoning. Would you say that there's been a reckoning like we're seeing in the States over in Britain as well with, I'd say after COVID, a lot of people are saying, the medical establishment, we have to re-examine a lot of what they've been calling for, a lot of what they did. They kind of pulled the wool over the eyes of Americans during the coronavirus pandemic. And
yeah, I mean, COVID has had, COVID was not a very good period in the UK. I don't think there's any leadership around the world that's really survived it very well. A lot of bad decisions were made. There was a push against, but we never had child COVID vaccines pushed on the children in the UK. The vaccine committee for children said that actually they were ambivalent whether children should have the vaccine against COVID. So that was never really a major issue. We didn't have masking of children under the age 11. So that also wasn't a major thing. The schooling was a major thing. There are over 100,000 British children that are lost now that have not returned back to school. That had a really negative impact. The lockdowns, we had 3 lockdowns. The final lockdown, we had 6 hours notice right before Christmas, and it lasted 4 or 5 months. And that was really brutal because it was during winter. I think a lot of people don't want to remember that horrible time. But none of those leaders have survived. The Conservative government and the way they handled COVID definitely played into the 2024 general election results, where they lost resoundingly. It was and they've not been able to recover. But it was also their commitment to net zero policies. They changed their logo to a tree about almost 20 years ago. They were just very left of center. They weren't conservative. And so they were not an alternative to Labour. Nothing actually really happened under them except we left the EU. And immigration got worse even after Brexit under the Conservatives. So there's just this feeling that they couldn't rule the country anymore. And actually it was the vote on the right that split, and that's how we got Labour. And part of that is now a new movement called Reform. It is the youngest political party in the UK, and it has more members now than the oldest political party in the UK, the Conservatives. And it is to the right of the Conservative Party, and it's headed up by Nigel Farage. And he is becoming the Populist Party, the Britain First, Make Britain Great Again, and it is attractive to Labour voters as well as to conservative right-wing voters. And they're coming out very strongly now against net zero. Immigration has always been their main issue. They are for curtailing immigration and limiting it and just, taking back control, really. So they are soaring through the polls. We just recently had local elections, which acts as a bellwether for our country.
Yeah.
It is like the midterms here. And Reform, again, has only been a political party less than a year. And it took 677 Conservative seats at the local level. It took control over 10 councils, entire councils at the local level, and also has a very commanding presence in 23 councils. And they are going forward now with some pretty aggressive policies that A, are anti-net zero, B, about going in to pension funds that the state invests in and taking out the ESG and the DEI, and it's going after wokeism. Yes. So my message to America right now is that I know the UK and Europe seem lost and adrift, but there are great movements happening at the local level in the grassroots to change the direction and to not give up on your allies overseas. We all need each other in this world, and we need each other to keep the free world free. And many people are taking the direction from the United States. And already we're seeing a dramatic shift in how we talk about immigration, how we talk about energy and net zero, how we talk about sovereignty and trade. And that is since the election of Donald Trump and his swearing in January. So, the UK wants to feel hopeful about its future like America does now. And keep what you're doing, but, don't forget about those of us watching you from overseas.
Well, thank you so much. I couldn't think of a stronger way to conclude our conversation. Thanks again so much for speaking with me and for coming and visiting again back home. I don't know what you consider.
Yes, this Washington and heritage and the conservative movement will always be home to me.
Well, thank you again so much, and best of luck across the pond.
Thank you.
Subscribe to get the news the legacy media won't tell you and only the Daily Signal can bring to you.